There is a moment that almost everyone experiences, but very few people ever talk about. It does not happen when somebody leaves. It does not happen during an argument. It does not happen when a relationship ends. It happens much more quietly than that. You simply stop talking. Not because you are angry. Not because you want attention. Not because you have planned some dramatic silence. You become quiet because, and that is usually the moment everything begins to reveal itself. There is a strange experiment people perform without realizing it. One day, inside a room filled with people they have known for years, they stop carrying the conversation. They stop asking questions. They stop making everyone laugh. They stop filling the silence before it becomes uncomfortable. And then something frightening happens. The room continues perfectly without them. Nobody asks why they became quiet. Nobody notices the difference. The conversation simply moves around them as if they were never speaking in the first place. And sometimes a person can sit among people they love and discover they have already become invisible. The painful truth is that many people spend years creating their importance through effort. The friend who always calls. The person who remembers birthdays. The one who keeps conversations alive. The one who asks everyone how they are doing. The one who stays after everyone leaves. The one who listens. The one who understands. The one who carries. And because they carry so much, nobody notices the weight they are holding. People simply become accustomed to it. You see this in families. When you are younger, your arrival changes things. You enter a room and someone calls your name. People ask where you have been. Someone wants to hear your story. Someone notices your mood. But years pass. People become busy. Life becomes heavier. And one day you sit at a dinner table listening to conversations move around you like water moving around a stone. Nobody asks what you think. Nobody asks how you have been. You answer questions only when they reach you. And at some point during the evening you realize something uncomfortable. You could leave this table and the conversation would continue exactly the same. That realization stays with people for years. Because becoming invisible rarely happens suddenly. It happens in small moments. You tell a story and nobody reacts. You stop speaking and nobody notices. You walk into a room and nobody looks up. You leave early and nobody asks where you are going. You become quieter each time because the silence around you begins teaching you something. Maybe your presence is not affecting the room anymore. And that is a difficult thing for people to admit. Because everyone wants to believe they matter more than they do. There is something painful about remembering who you used to be. Most people carry two versions of themselves. The person they once were. And the person they slowly became. You remember being younger. You remember laughing without thinking. You remember feeling wanted. You remember friends waiting for you. You remember being included before you had to ask. You remember feeling necessary. And then life slowly changes. People get married. People move away. People become busy. Priorities change. The same people who once needed your presence learn to live without it. Nobody does anything wrong. Nobody intentionally leaves. But somehow the distance still grows. And one day you realize that the phone no longer rings. The invitations become fewer. The conversations become shorter. And eventually you stop reaching out because you become curious. You want to know what happens if you become silent. That is when reality speaks. Because silence has a way of exposing relationships. Some friendships survive only because one person keeps calling. Some families remain connected because one person keeps gathering everyone together. Some relationships continue because one person refuses to stop trying. And the moment that person becomes quiet, The entire structure begins showing its cracks. You discover who notices, who reaches, who asks, who remembers, and who simply continues their life without realizing you disappeared. The frightening part is not always that other people fail to notice. Sometimes the frightening part is realizing how much of your identity depended on being needed. There are people who spend their entire lives becoming useful. They solve problems. They help others. They listen. They sacrifice. They carry everyone emotionally. And because they are always giving, they never ask themselves a dangerous question. Who would stay if I stopped? Many people are loved for their effort. Very few feel loved for their existence. And eventually exhaustion forces the question. You become silent. Not to punish anyone. Not to test anyone. You simply become tired of proving your importance. There is a particular kind of loneliness that appears in crowded places. You can experience it during family gatherings, birthdays, friend groups, workplaces. Everyone is speaking. Everyone is laughing. And somehow you feel farther away than if you were sitting completely alone. You look around the room. People are talking over each other. Stories continue. Laughter moves across the table. And you suddenly realize that you have not spoken in 20 minutes. Nobody noticed. You begin wondering how long it has actually been. 30 minutes. An hour. An entire evening. You realize that you became quiet to see whether anyone would come looking for you emotionally. Most people never do. Not because they do not care. Because people often become accustomed to someone's presence. The person who always stays becomes invisible. The person who always understands becomes expected. The person who always gives becomes ordinary. And ordinary things are rarely observed carefully. There are moments from childhood that return unexpectedly. You remember running toward people. You remember believing that friendship would last forever. You remember thinking that the people around you would always remain. As children, we assume permanence. As adults, we discover silence. Friends disappear quietly. Conversations end without endings. People become strangers gradually. And nobody prepares us for the experience of becoming less important inside someone else's life. Perhaps that is why silence feels so frightening. Because silence removes distraction. You begin noticing who remembers you. Who asks about you. Who searches for your opinion. Who notices your absence. And most importantly, who notices your silence. There are people who slowly stop sharing their thoughts because nobody seems interested anymore. There are people who stop telling stories because nobody listens. There are people who stop expressing emotions because they learned that nobody asks questions. Eventually they become quieter versions of themselves. Not because they changed. Because the world stopped responding. That is why some of the quietest people were once the loudest. Some of the calmest people were once the most expressive. Some of the people who now say very little once wanted to tell someone everything. But silence taught them. People often think loneliness means being alone. It doesn't. Some of the loneliest moments happen while sitting beside people who no longer truly see you. You begin speaking less. Laughing less. Sharing less. And eventually you stop because you are no longer certain your presence changes anything. That thought damages people. Because human beings want to matter. Not perfectly. Not constantly. Just enough to know that their absence would leave something behind. The most painful realization is not that people leave. It is discovering that they adapted. Life continued. The room remained full. The conversation survived. And somewhere inside that realization, people begin questioning themselves. Was I important? Was I simply useful? Did people need me? Or did they only need what I provided? These questions remain unanswered for many years. Because most people are afraid of silence. Silence asks questions that words protect us from. What happens if you stop trying? What happens if you stop carrying everyone? What happens if you stop being the one who understands? Who notices? Who remains? Who reaches for you? And perhaps the darkest realization of all is understanding that many people are not afraid of being alone. They are afraid of discovering that they were never as important as they believed. That realization changes people. They become quieter. Not out of bitterness. Not out of anger. But because they finally understand something. Presence and importance are not the same thing. Effort and love are not the same thing. Being needed and being valued are not the same thing. And the moment you become silent, all of those differences begin revealing themselves. The room becomes clearer. The relationships become clearer. The friendships become clearer. And eventually you become clearer to yourself. Because silence does not always reveal who others are. Sometimes it reveals who you have become. A person who spent years earning their place. A person who measured their worth through usefulness. A person who forgot that being present should not require performance. And maybe that is why the quiet becomes so heavy. You realize how long you have been carrying conversations, carrying relationships, carrying expectations, carrying people. And when you finally put the weight down, you discover which connections stand on their own. Some do. Many don't. But perhaps the hardest truth is this. People do not always notice when you stop speaking. People do not always notice when you become silent. People do not always notice when you disappear inside the room. And eventually you understand that the silence was never there to punish them. The silence was there to show you the truth. Because the moment you become silent, everything changes. Not because people change. Not because the world changes. But because for the first time, you stop creating your importance and begin seeing whether it exists without your effort. And that answer is often much quieter than people expect. If this felt uncomfortably familiar, subscribe for more psychological explorations of human behavior.